Right, Nick, you once told me a story about receiving feedback via fax in the early, I would guess, the mid to early 1990s.
That would have been about 93.
So you would receive feedback on copy that you'd written from Bill and Mark, who were in the States. You were in London.
Yeah. And we'd sit around. We knew it was going to come through. So 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because it would the 5 hours difference. And we'd sit by the fax, and then you'd hear, and we were writing 12 and 16 page packs. They're relatively short packs back then. But it's so slow when it comes out of the fax. And the worst thing was to just see a line all the way across each page. And it slowly, and you just wait for the next page, another line all the way through. And this was Mark mainly, who would be quite rigorous in his editing. And then it'd be followed up about a day later with a FedEx. We'd get the actual physical copy of it as well.
It's like death by 2000.
I know. It was always Bill would just put, no, maybe. And if he ever said, it was encouraging. It was the most encouraging thing you could get from Bill. Mark was a lot more demonstrative, and I think I took the way I taught other copywriters was definitely the Mark Ford school of teaching.
Welcome to The Fix. Sit down with copywriting experts Nick O'Connor and Glenn Fisher as they review, discuss, and improve real-world copy sent in by you. This is The Fix.
I want to go back to the whole fax as a medium of getting feedback. So I think that's quite interesting. But I remember I used to, so the copywriter I trained under was called Woody, and he used to always have his arm over the copy when you came into the room, and he'd build you up, and it's really good, really like what you're doing here, and then he'd go, and then he'd move his arm. But I think that's a rite of passage, and I think a lot of people now actually don't go through that and then can't take it when.
Definitely. Yeah,
I'll give feedback to some people, in our academy programs and stuff like that. Sometimes it is just, you just need to scrap it all and see this line you've written on page 9. That's your idea, so start with that. Right. And you do actually need to learn that. Anyway, we should go back. So do you think right now in today's world, you can write a piece of copy, send it off for feedback via email. It's cheap, it's free, you can get feedback very, very quickly. Obviously back then you couldn't. Obviously you're having to fax it off to them to begin with, or send off your draft.
Yeah, it was pre-internet days, so it was fax to them.
So did you write differently, do you think? Did you develop, did you send off for feedback at a different point? That's a very Byzantine way of getting feedback.
But it's difficult to say because it was early days, and I'd only been a copywriter for I was a new copywriter. I'd not done any real commercial writing before that. So I didn't really know what to expect. And I just remember being so angry at Mark. It's going, what's wrong? What's wrong with this? This is just simple. What I've presented is really good. And of course, I learned that it wasn't. And I kind of wanted to prove, it's almost like a father figure. I wanted to prove that the copy was right. So I did go back to it, strike through. But to answer your question, I think people have got it easy these days if they're not getting that kind of real tough editing process, that kind of tough love process. And I think that the ease of creating copy, sending copy, and it is a time thing. We all seem to have less and less time, because I remember when I used to go through other people's copy, it'd be line by line and really trying to make line by line edits. So I think it has changed a lot.
Yeah, I remember that. You review all of mine in longhand.
In longhand.
And you bring it back into me with all the reading.
Yeah.
And a couple of words that weren't.
Yes.
It's sort of that process of chiseling, removing all the shit, basically. But what we're left with is good.
I was actually thinking about exactly the same thing about when writing a pack, usually long form packs, that it is like being a sculptor, and you've got a block of marble, and you start to chip into it, you start to see the form, and then you've got to be so careful that you're not going to chip away too much, but it is that chipping away. And I was using there's a sculptor, Giacometti, who did those really long, spindly, almost looks like they're made out of pipe cleaners. And he used to start with a big block of clay, and he would try and remove as much of the clay as possible and just leave the essence of what's there. And so I still kind of follow that principle that I'll write 3-4 times more than I need to, knowing that it's cutting the fat or cutting the marble or whatever you want to.
Do you? I'm interested in that. So we're really talking about kind of editing at this. We've jumped right to like because I think I'd like to go back to like the headline and the idea concept, but when you're actually in there and you're looking at the line edits and chiseling it down and doing that, I think I have an obsession with that I do want to get it down to reduce it. I think it sounds obscene to people maybe outside of the direct response world. We're like, you've written a 10,000 word? What do you mean?
How dare you talk about brevity?
What are you talking about? But they really, like, the good ones could be 20,000 words, but you've got it down to the essential 10. Don't get me wrong, there's some waffle in there or whatever. Although actually, there's
certainly some waffle in this question.
Yeah, some waffle in this question. This is my life, is waffle. But that obsession of getting it down, I certainly recognise that. You speaking about it there, and that is almost a little bit artistic in that kind of Giacometti kind of way of getting it down. And I asked Simon the same, because I would kind of come back to the character of the copywriter rather than the skills and the things. But is there a artistic obsession? Is there something in you, do you think, and in copywriters because why would you keep looking at it and keep going back to it but you've got a desire to do that, to get to craft this kind of perfect piece of copy?
I think ultimately it's nothing to do with the copy. And I've been thinking hard about this all day, because I was thinking, what kind of questions are going to ask? I need to come up with some really clever answers. It's nothing to do with the copy. It's all to do with the audience. So I have always, and that's why I've spent a lot of my career talking to my audience, answering emails, answering telephone calls. Years ago, I used to open all the mail and look at every single, when it was direct mail. And so when I'm writing and editing especially, I kind of stop being the copywriter, or I am the copywriter, and I'm the grumpiest, most skeptical member of my target audience. And I read it as if they're reading it, and at any single word that they feel you're talking crap or that I don't believe it. So I've got the objections.
Yeah.
That
is we talk about like the skills you can learn to be a copywriter, but that's one I don't think we talk about as enough. Maybe is that idea that you have to at some point. There's 3 stages of writing. There's the prep, the research, then there's the writing, then there's the editing. We're in the editing work. To be able to turn off and go, I'm not a copywriter anymore. I'm a reader. I'm looking at this as fresh, and to almost trick. I don't know how you do it, Nick, but like to trick yourself into going, I am not the person who wrote this. I am this person reading it. Don't believe you, and get into that mindset is a real hard skill.
Well, I think it's kind of like method acting. And I found it very difficult to begin with, because it was 55 plus male and I was 30. It's a lot easier now because I am 55 plus male. But it was trying to, and I'd think, is this like my dad or is this like someone I knew? And I just turn up the grumpiness, turn up the skepticism, and then read my copy as if they're looking at it. And it is that also getting rid of the copywriter ego, which is, it's not just taking away that first paragraph that you craft and you think that's a brilliant opening and you just put your hand over it and it starts further down. It's just that ruthless self-editing. It's still, I remember those lines that Mark used to do, and I kind of know why he was doing it. That, no, this is all fluff, this is all filler. Every word must be really trying to...
Yeah. I've convinced myself to be excited and like trying to get a dopamine hit by getting rid of that line that you really don't want to, and just go, no, I'm going to get rid of that. Like, let's try and like almost dare myself to say it in even less. And I've actually tried to start, like, I'm doing it because I'm editing a novel at the moment, so it's a longer piece where you've got much more space to get rid of stuff. But to go, actually, what if I just don't say that? And the amount of times you realize that it hits harder, and the copy around it, if you've done your job, just hits harder and better and tighter. I can remember doing a script for you, Nick. You were hosting the thing, and then you would read it out and send it back to me, kind of thing. But again, what you were doing was just going, that first 2 minutes, just get rid. And it's all there. You could say it all, but the tighter and tighter you get it, the better it is.
Well, I would do that on, I mean, talk about going from fax to the modern mod. I would do that on a WhatsApp voice note, but I would read it, but I would pepper it with, so I'd be reading Glenn's words, but I'd pepper it with some of mine, which is like, Glenn, I've been reading for 6 minutes. It's too long. I just caught some of it. It needs to be 3 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, I think we should I just want to go back to those days in 93.
Mid-90s.
So like,
early mid-90s.
beyond the feedback via fax, so you're a contemporary of John Ford, I guess.
Yeah.
You kind of both started at the same time.
Well, he was the first US Agora copywriter in-house, and I was the first non-US copywriter in-house in the UK.
And you started roughly around the same.
Yeah. I think he started about a year before.
Yeah. So talk to me about how Agora back then trained and taught its copywriters, not necessarily the means, the fax element, but like, how did they teach you to write?
They had swipe files. So they had because it's direct response and it's all down to testing, and you have a control pack, they would give you the control pack. So we had, it started out as one box, but I remember by the time I'd left 10 years later, it was almost a whole room of not just classic control packs that they got from Agora, from Boardroom, Weiss, all the classic, and this was all mainly financial promotions. So I would just go through that and just read through those. They gave me, and I never gave them back, some original Gary Halbert letters. Wow. So I've got his original newsletters. And that has always stuck with me, Gary Halbert, even though his voice isn't suited to all types of products. That was a real impact on me as a young copywriter. So there was that. They'd give you a bunch of copy that had worked and say, that worked, try something like that.
And who was, when they say we, were Bill and Mark mentoring you?
Yes, directly.
Remotely?
Bill was living in London when he interviewed me and gave me the job.
Right. What was that like? What's it like to be interviewed by Bill?
Well, I didn't know Bill until afterwards, so there was not. If he interviewed me now, I'd be scared, but I wasn't as scared then. But he seemed like a very erudite, smart American guy, and he wasn't brash at all, and it was, it just seemed very natural. And we got on pretty well, and yeah.
So you were working, he was in London, you were...
He was in London, and then I started in March, and then by May, I went and spent 2 weeks in Baltimore with the copywriters. They just moved from downtown Baltimore, which was a bit like an episode of The Wire. It was like people on the streets, you could hear gunshots, and they said, don't go out. No, I don't think it has. But then Bill had just bought something in Mount Vernon, the first on Mount Vernon, West Mount Vernon. And they had a whole floor just for copywriters. We had our own, it was called Pod. I don't know if you've ever, it was called Paradigms. And it was a kind of a mini copywriting cult where we were elevated to this special level, and we were given our own rooms, our own cubicles. And that's where I met John, Addison, who else was there? Nina Camp, I think it was. And there's about a dozen of us. And there was one other UK copywriter, and we went over there, spent 2 weeks. I didn't want to go back. I mean, Dave Gibson back at Fleet Street, Agora's London office, didn't want me to go back. Because it's the first time I'd been to America, and I just loved the whole idea of copywriting and being in this kind of environment, which was very... intellectually stimulating, but also it was a lot of fun. I was in my mid-20s.
What was your take on the people, the other copywriters? You know, if you had to describe them as a bunch, what were they like? I mean, I know some of the people you're talking about.
Yeah. They were all very smart people, and I think they had an actual policy of how they would select the copywriters. It was from one college, A lot of them came from St John's College, I think it was.
Because that's where Dan came from, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Dan went to
Addison.
went to college with Addison.
Yeah, and I think there are two different St John's colleges. One's in Santa Fe or somewhere like that, and one's somewhere on the East Coast. And so they all had a very broad, they call it liberal arts background. Yes. So they're
very well read.
Very, very well read. They had, I think St John's had this, the 100 books you must read, or it was some kind of series of volumes, everything from Plato and Aristotle and all the way through to Voltaire and Marx and whatever. So they were all extremely well read, and they were a lot of fun as well. They liked to party, so it was kind of best of both worlds, really. And what I think it's just being immersed in talking to other copywriters, sitting in when we'd sit in a meeting every morning and go over, look at people's copy. Bill and Mark would be there at the same time. I think even Jay Abraham wasn't there, but he was on a speakerphone and he'd been looking at some copy as well. So we're really exposed to kind of really high level.
So I'm curious about, so now we learn and we teach things like the 4 U's or the 4 P's, different ways of making our copy stronger.
Yeah.
Had any of those rubrics, frameworks been developed in the early 90s?
I saw them being developed and they were tested on us. So I saw them when I first joined, the 4 U's or the 4 P's didn't exist. And then through a process of going to America, and then there'd be lots of events put on, training events, and then Mark and Bill started to introduce these concepts. And of course, we all found them very, very easy then as formulas to help us. But we were the guinea pigs for the 4 U's and the 4 P's.
And did you feel, so obviously, to kind of fast forward a little bit, when you came back, you not only became a successful copywriter, you ultimately became the publisher of that business, and you gone on to run your own successful businesses using lots of the same vibe.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how to put it, but did you ever have this sense of getting this, I don't know, picking up a torch in Baltimore and bringing that agora fire back to London, having to share it with other people? Did you have a sense of what an unusual place it was to work for, that you had to pass that on?
Yeah, because I thought that when I left, I did an MA in creative writing, and I thought, and I had loads of debts. I thought, how am I going to earn some money doing something I like? I want to be I'll do some writing. I'll be a copywriter. And I thought that I would end up above the line doing really short copy and really creative kind of stuff. But the first company that actually gave me an interview and I got the job was Agora. So I kind of then learned there's this other kind of copywriting. And I think there's just naturally in me, I was also interested in business, in running a business and making money. So naturally that lent itself, direct response, long form copy kind of lent itself. So yeah, and I wasn't joking when it is kind of a cult, that I felt that this is something special. I'm learning something which is extremely valuable and can make a difference to a business, as well as if you've got the right products, you can introduce products that will help people. So yeah, and then I was tasked with eventually hiring copywriters, training copywriters. And so yeah, it did feel like, Mark and Bill, Mark had kind of been my Zen master, whacking me on the head with his, the facts. With his cigar. And then I was passing it on. And it is that kind of circle of abuse that, it's generational.
It's not bad as scars.
Yeah, no. No, exactly. Well, I'm sure, but have you subsequently hired people, trained them?
Yeah.
And do you train them in the same way?
Absolutely.
I do.
You are. You're a tough person to get copy past.
Well, I think because I learned from Nick, who learned from Mark, and I also had copy reviewed by Mark as well, which was quite a chastening experience in front of your peers as well, which is always bad. But I just wanted to ask you, because these guys asked me the question, and I thought it was quite interesting. When you first saw an Agora style financial promotion, when it was first slid across the table to you, what was your sort of visceral reaction to it?
I'm just trying to think of when you were saying that about I was trying to think, what was the first promo I ever saw that I can remember? And this was before, a couple of years later, they started doing magalogs. And so that changed the whole thing of, how things looked. But it was probably a John Ford predictions pack. And it was for a newsletter that's now defunct, but it's called Taipan. And it was essentially a tech newsletter. And John is very well known for the depth of research, the amount of research he does. And he came up with doing these predictions packs. And I just remember, and it would be 7 predictions about what's going to happen to America. Yeah, it's going to go to, this could be blood, literally the blood on the, it wasn't the blood on the streets pack, because someone else wrote that, but it was essentially that. And I just thought, you can actually have these huge, really include radical ideas, different ideas that are not in the mainstream. Because I've always been a contrarian, and so I've always judged my copy on that, trying not to be cliched, trying not to be something I've ever seen before. And so when I did see one of John's predictions packs, I thought that it just showed me what was possible. And that selling isn't just about, here's the product. I mean, they don't talk about the product. They're talking about ideas. They're talking about new ways.
What about the tone and the tone of voice and the style of it? Did that sort of jar with you, or did you think this is exactly what I want to be?
No, not at all. I think that it was very natural because the tone was very, very conversational. Even though it was still very credible, and there's obviously it was coming from a position of deep knowledge and research. There was something about that where the copy disappears.
Yes,
and that's what you want. You don't really want anyone to remember your copy. It's just that you get into it and you're already on the 4th page before you even realize what you're doing. And I think that was something that really struck me. It's something that I've always tried to carry on with my own writing, copywriting.
That feeling you get when you see a predictions package, especially those old-fashioned ones in the print days, they're much harder to do on a video because you can't have the way the page is structured is different for technical reasons. It's harder to lay out. But I remember seeing promotions like that and Plague of the Black Death, which me and Bill talked about in episode 1 of this series. In fact, he talked about the very first predictions packages or where that idea came from. So if you haven't watched episode 1, that's a callback. But I remember reading stuff like that and having that epiphany of like, wow, what is possible? To call that a sales letter is to reduce it to something that it's not. It's so much bigger and more exciting than that. This has as much in common with speculative fiction because it's a radical reimagining of what the world could be like. And it's like, wow, I get to write that. And if I do it in the right way and they give me money at the end of it, it was a success.
Right. I mean, Bill even went to the point of doing, after the magalogs, there was then the bookalogs. And I think they became so expensive to put in the mail that they've never really done it. They didn't last too long. But he did What Went Wrong with the 20th Century, which was about 126 pages. It was a small format. But people were there was a second-hand market when Amazon would just
I've got a copy of Plague of the Black Death as a book.
Again, we talked about this with Bill. You could pick up Plague of the Black Death, A Man's Right to Wealth, What Went Wrong with the 20th Century. They are all second-hand. You usually have to buy Canadian versions. I don't know why.
Oh, really?
But if you look on eBay or Amazon, you're building a swipe file. Go and look at those things from the early 90s.
I want to bring it back slightly because it's in this series, and we're in danger of creating our own weird feedback loop. Because you kind of created the vibe in the UK, which then we've inherited, and it's gone through the people in this room kind of thing. But I'm interested in that creativity idea, a call forward. The last interview, and this is me speaking to Mark. But I wanted to go on the creative angle, and I was speaking to Mark about being a poet and his poetry side. I know you're a creative person, that thing. But that creative aspect for me, and we talked about it with Simon as well, that element of, I think about all of the copy that we get sent in the fix, and can you review this, can you review that? And look, it's all comes from a very technical from a copy place, from a literally copying other copy and this kind of weird loop. But Simon identified, you seem to have the same thing, so I'm interested in your thoughts, is when you clock, hang on a minute, like this isn't a format thing, it's not about copyright, it's not about sales, it's about engagement, it's about persuading someone through the use of language to get them from A to B, it's a creative act. That seems to then imbue that certain person, that we all share certain personality traits. When you clock that actually is often the biggest piece of advice you try and give copywriters is like, stop trying to sell, stop trying to do that, just understand the idea and then get someone to read loads of stuff from that point to that point without even realizing they've read it and just absorb it. Figuring out that it is a creative thing, that it is fun, that it is intellectually stimulating. How was your experience of that? Because I think you're probably one of the people who brought that to the UK and thus knocked onto Simon and then knocked onto me and knocked onto Nick and went down this thing. How was that creative thing? When did that tweak in your head and you could think, hang on?
I think it is, and this is something else I was thinking, I was kind of reflecting on as I was walking here this morning. There's one editor who said to me, and he was a financial editor, and he said, it's just amazing what you do. It's like a dark art that you can write something which gets printed, gets sent out in the post, someone opens it and then goes, yeah, I'm going to send you a check for 250 quid. And it comes in the other side. So for me, it was that there was a kind of, not Promethean, but it's a kind of a creation of something out of nothing, that you can put words, take an idea, then turn that idea into words, and those words are then broadcast, someone receives them, and then that makes them go and do something. This weird chain of causality that comes out of your copy. So, because I know that, I'm not selling cool products, I'm not doing cool advertising. So, but I want to be cool. I want to find something that's interesting, which is creative. So I've always seen it as that it is the creative payoff for me is knowing that I've been able to communicate something which will then get that call to action.
Yeah. So it's
a magical process, isn't it? When you first do it and the money, you write something and then money comes back. I know that's massively reducing it.
No.
Send a letter out and money comes back.
I mean, in the direct mail days and direct response, we used to look at, as much as we'd look at the copy, we'd also look at spreadsheets. And it would be, how much did that headline, if you did a test on an A/B test, one had a different headline to another. Which one brought in more money? And sometimes you could see that one brings in double the amount of money. So it does come down to dollars and dollars.
But that itself is creatively destructive anyway, isn't it? It sort of tells you what you thought was a good copy.
There's a realness to it as well, in the sense that, because in the creative world where we think it's all objective, and we think, no, that's thinking that's good or bad, or think having that perversely or contradictorily, the fact that you're being creative, but then it's no, that expression is better than that expression. That one moves people and that one doesn't as much. Then you go, oh, right, this is real. I genuinely have purpose and control and what's the word? Agency over my words have agency over people. That's a really interesting kind of megalomaniac kind of thing.
Dangerous.
It's going back to those days when
Glenn was saluting while he's... You're just listening to this.
When we had direct mail, I used to go into the mail room and hang about until the post came. Some days it would be disheartening. Where's the post? And they'd tick it up and it'd be But then the days when you got a real gangbusters, it's like Christmas, sacks and sacks of envelopes with a check in it or with their details and tipping them out. But the best part of it wasn't just seeing all the money coming in. It was actually those people who didn't buy and wanted to use our free post address to tell us exactly why they didn't buy. And I used to get, it's like Mark, but even like an evil version of Mark. You would get people line critiquing the direct mail and tell you, no, I don't believe this. And it was just like, oh, it's like a GIF.
Well, it's like a gift for feedback. That is.
I'm interested just when you mentioned post and thing, and I always remember you telling me once that you once, when packs were printed and what have you, didn't you get one where there was a printing error and it folded out?
No, it didn't fold out. We had the pages in the wrong order.
All right.
And we did a split test, and it pulled a greater response.
Speaking of funny feedback, when I was a publisher, the COO wanted to build a customer service bot. This is back in 2017, before AI was trendy. So he spent 6 months building it. And it was just to answer people's questions if they couldn't bother.
There was a physical bot as well. Tell me there was a physical
And I already named it and everything. And the day he launched it, so it went live, they could click to chat. The first thing anybody wrote back to it just said, fuck off, bots. There was a fourth word that I can't even say. I'll offend our American listeners. Just said, fuck off, bot. And I remember saying to him, like, that's what people think. I'm really sorry you spent 6 months on it and that's what you got. That's the market and you're fired.
But I still, even though, the post I think it's even better now, is that I make sure that I check all the emails that come in. Because if we're doing a warm-up to a launch, that I start to warm people up, say what this is about. And then I'm always want to see exactly what people are saying. What their objections are. Oh, I've seen this before. What makes this so different? And so I still, as a big part of what I do, is reacting to what the customer, what our prospective customer is saying.
Yeah, I must have learned it from you, Nick, because that I feel like that's been something I've done, and I remember it from you just left, I think, when I started. But that idea of like mining the CS to understand what people are doing and listen to that. One email is 10 readers and getting all of that stuff and getting but also on a creative level, like understanding the language that people are using, definitely seeing what's going on there, going, all right, I'm saying this, but you're not reading it like that. You're only taking that bit. All right, that as a resource is perhaps one of the
two-way conversation between you and the reader.
Definitely. And I still use that, we call it copy fodder, where I'll get either testimonials or feedback or complaints, and I'll put them into a big document, and then I'll start to highlight turns of phrase that they will use. And sometimes it'll be phrases that your target audience are using, and because we're not, as copywriters, the target audience, that they'll use kind of short terms that are specific to that area. And so then I feed those back into the copy. I mean, I guess AI will be able to do that more now. You could start to seed. I mean, I don't know if we'll talk about AI, but AI is at the moment for copywriting, it's kind of like a brick phone.
Yeah.
And it'll take about 5 years, I think, and then we will have proper copywriting AI, but it's not there yet.
So, as someone, you were part of that first copy pod.
Yeah.
So, based on your experience there, but also, all the copywriters you've worked with since, what qualities do you think the best ones display? They could be good or bad qualities, by the way. Could be positive or negative. Like, what makes the best
as a human, as their personality?
Yeah, I'm interested in their personality or their traits, their habits, not necessarily their style of writing. I think there are lots of different ways of writing copy. I'm interested in what makes copywriters.
I think good raconteurs, and I'm using all the people that I grew up with. We used to go down the pub. And so it was a very convivial atmosphere. But I think it is people who could talk and could enjoyed telling stories. as well as research. People who extremely well enjoyed reading, enjoyed the research process.
It's interesting, the speaking thing, because there was this idea we sometimes have of writers, not necessarily agora, organisers being quite quiet. But I think that's, insular. But actually, that's true of lots of copywriters. And it goes back to something we talked about with Simon about what would you actually say?
Well,
If forced to say it, how would you say it?
With both Simon and Nick, I believe we're in that put. I think it was the mulberry bush in in South Bank. But I can remember when I first got the job, and FedEx kind of took me, and I think you guys were like, because it was Munton's leaving do was like my first social. We went to the pub, and it was like a round table. We were upstairs, I seem to remember. And I remember ringing my mum going, I need £5, Mum. And she was like, why? And I went, it's just so I can pretend to buy a round, just so I can go out with these people and talk. And it was a game. It was almost like a game of just comedy. We're just talking nonsense. I won't go into what we were saying because it was slightly offensive. But it was, you wanted to try and say something and try and speak and say that funny thing. Then that Simon would then pick up on and roll with that idea. In a non-copy way, but it was still just, let's just take ideas and say something funny and then riff on that and say strange things and be creative. And that thing.
I think it's that playfulness, definitely.
Whereas on any other day, I'd describe myself as introverted and writing and but there is a weird contradiction when you say to speak.
It's never ever felt like work to me. I think maybe that a lot to do with the way that Nick sort of had his vision for the business, but certainly with the copywriters that we had around us at the time, it just never ever felt. I never felt like I'm going to work. I'm going to sit at an office desk for 8 hours and then I'm going to go home or whatever. It was always something. There was always something funny happening.
Yeah, well, I remember
not even just interesting.
The idea, even today, I'll still say, "Are we going for a cheeky one after work?" Because that's what it's just that language and that idea. I can remember sitting there. Simon was telling us earlier about the first time he saw a pack and the interview situation where you sit. I can remember sat there being shown these things, kind of going like that, and then I think it was days later, sat there, and Dave, who was my boss at the time, would kind of come in, and there'd be me and Tommy sat there. Tommy's really helping me, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? Not knowing what the hell's going on, and Dave would kind of wander in, and at 3 o'clock be like, cheeky one? And I'm going, right, hang on, how does any of this work? How is this office functioning? We've got these long things that people are selling, but we're going out and talking. But now, looking back on that ability to talk, to kind of throw an idea out, to be able to be cool is a crap word.
I think it's being articulate is really what we're saying. To be able to succeed in a world in which we write at length about complicated ideas about how the world works and how the world may come to work in the future, you have to be able to articulate that.
Yeah.
And it's not just about writing. There's kind of what we're circling.
Is there something
being able to express it.
Is there something else, though, when you say that about it's the ability, because I know you both were taught from that kind of Bill Fade. We talked about failure and the ability to fail. Mm. And you have that now where you'll share some copy and it's like, no, it's wrong. You need to do it again. Mm. When you go in the pub, you kind of you're testing that out to say, am I okay to say this weird thing? And you go, yeah, that's okay. And creating that atmosphere of safety where it's like, no, we can be creative. That's cool. You're allowed to do that. And then you transplant that back into a very specific thing where it's like, right, we have to sell this financial.
I think that's really interesting. I think it was, if there's anything I can think of Agora, it was the atmosphere and the conditions that they allowed you to work in. That it was, you're saying about you're not encouraged to fail, but the whole thing was you were testing something. And if the test didn't work, there was still a control. And that was the whole process. But there was a kind of an element of experimentation, being entrepreneurial, trying things, and then seeing what happened. But it wasn't seen as failure. If your pack didn't work, it didn't reflect necessarily. I mean, you couldn't keep doing it, but that it didn't necessarily reflect badly on you. And I think that it fostered. And a part of it was the drinking, but it was the partying afterwards. So you could continue to the conversation, say, what have you been working on? And we could still, continue to talk about it. But I think it was fostering that opportunity to try anything. If you came up with the Bookalog or you wanted to do another format, so there was that freedom to experiment, which I'm not sure if people always have that can work in those kind of environments.
I was just going to say, we're talking about the past and how it was. You've gone on to run your own successful company. You use these models that you've learned over the years that we all talk about. How have you seen things change, and what are you? Is there any trends you've noticed for copy specifically? Has your copy that you wrote a promo 10, 20 years ago changed to how you write one now and how you position in the market?
I'd love to say yes, but no, not at all. I think there are certain principles of you're getting someone from one point A to point B, and point B is they're going to spend money with you, essentially. That's what the business I'm in, that someone's going to buy a subscription, they're going to go to an event, or they're going to buy some software or whatever it might be. And there are only so many ways that you can get someone from hello, meeting them for the first time to that point. So no, I think I've always want to be creative and try and, I don't want to write the same pack, even though deep down I know that I could use the same pack, because people are bombarded with so many sales pieces now and so many pieces of content. You can really go out, and I sometimes do cheat, because we produce so many products over the years that sometimes I'll go back to, there's that pack that was kind of similar to it 4 years ago. No one will remember it. And then I'll use that. So I'm not looking at it. I don't use it exactly, but I will go back and look at and take certain sections and put those in and then write around it. Because I know that there's a certain structure that works. We were talking about the 4 Ps, 4 Us. Those things, even though they might go in and out of fashion for copywriting techniques, they still work. And so for me, I think it is a bit of an indulgence sometimes if I want to be creative. And every time I've tried to be really wacky and creative, it never works. But then going back to okay, no, stop that. Go back to first principles. What are we trying to do? You're trying to give someone the benefit of promise without having to do this. And all those principles still work. So, and I don't get bored of it.
Because things change in fashion as well, don't they? So, maybe if you look back at what was working 2 years ago to what was working 10 years ago, 20 years, you go back to 20 years and say, actually, now that doesn't really work. Comes back around.
Yeah.
Because the world changes, or the way it will be received. Even I find myself doing that now. I've been doing it a lot, less time than you have. But I'll suggest something to a newer writer and they'll say, where did you get that from? And I think, well, if I told you the real answer was I saw it 12 years ago, you'd think less of me, so I pretend I thought it up.
Oh, really?
No. But but I mean, you find yourself, you think, I've seen an idea like that before, and we did it like this.
Yeah.
So you remember how to catch that specific idea.
Going back to the swipe file idea, I mean, when people offer swipe files, it is, for me, I get so excited when I hear a big copywriter is releasing their swipe file of not only their work, but work that's inspired them. Yeah, it is kind of busman's holiday. It's the kind of thing I'm really, really interested in. So, and I mean, there's another thing. I look at old ads as well. Go on to Project Gutenberg or archive.org and go and look at stuff like Scientific American from the 1920s. And you see some of the classic, where direct response advertising was really born in America, page ads, and there's some amazing stuff there. So sometimes if I'm just looking for, an idea, it's something just to spark an idea, I might just randomly go into archive.org and look at an old copy of something, and a headline might spark something.
Yeah. Do you know what? I feel like the only appropriate way for us to end this conversation is to say, it's probably time we went and had a pint.
But what did
Also,
Frank used to say? Regal. Frank, who he wasn't a copywriter, but
Frank is the spirit. We were saying that Simon's the godfather of the fix. Frank's the spirit animal.
And he would send an email and it wasn't just a Friday, to be honest, it was any day of the week. And it would just be Regal, question mark, which is an anagram of lager.
Well, I had printed in my office in Agora a picture of Frank that I printed out and just put next to me, even though he sat opposite. A picture of him next.
Let's go and see if he's in the
Let's
pub
go
now,
and
shall we?
see the spirit of Frank.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, mate. That's
Absolutely.
fascinating. And again, one of the things that's beautiful to see is the way in which all of our episodes have kind of talked to each other. And Bill talking about the 70s, you talking about stuff that happened in the 90s, obviously stuff that's happened subsequently. I think there's a real sense of continuity across all of these things, which was not by design, but it's definitely something I hope for. So thank you very much for sharing your experience.
We enjoyed it.
And we'll rope you in again next year.
Okay, I'll come up with some new ideas.
We'll just do
I'll just bring my swipe file.
We'll have new listeners by now.
Right, let's go to the pub.
Good.
If you enjoy The Fix and want to get access to even more good stuff, join the Fix Accelerator today. Get access to special masterclasses from Nick and me, watch expert interviews with industry legends, join live copy feedback sessions every week, and get connected to our very own private copy network. Visit thefixaccelerator.com for more information.